My name is Ivy Caldwell, I am 30 years old. I still remember the exact second my older brother looked across that polished conference table in downtown Burlington and told me, in the calmest voice he owned, that the family company no longer required my presence. He said it like he was offering me a kindness, like stepping aside would somehow free me from a burden I had never asked to carry. The demand landed so softly that for one ridiculous heartbeat I waited for the punchline. There was none. If you have ever sat in a room full of people who share your last name and watched them decide you were disposable, drop a yes or no in the comments right now. I need to know how many of us have heard that particular brand of quiet erasure. It happened on a gray Tuesday in late autumn, inside a rented glass conference room on the 4th floor of a building that overlooked the waterfront. I had driven in from the lakeside property my parents still called the estate, expecting a routine quarterly review of the sustainable building materials firm. The three of us had grown from a 2-room workshop into something that employed nearly 200 people across Vermont and upstate New York. My older brother had texted the night before, all easy warmth, saying he and my father just wanted a quick alignment meeting before the next investor call. I showed up in the same navy blazer I always wore to these things, coffee in hand, notebook open, ready to walk through the latest supplier contracts the way I had every quarter for the past 8 years. My older brother did not waste time. He slid a single-page summary across the table, the paper still warm from the printer, and said, "We think it's best if you transition out of day-to-day operations. Effective immediately." I read the page twice. It listed my current titles, Director of Product Development, Lead on the Recycled Composite Division, and then, in neat bullet points, proposed that those responsibilities fold into his oversight. My father sat at the head of the table, hands folded, face arranged in that careful neutral expression he used whenever he had already made up his mind and simply needed the rest of us to catch up. "You're serious," I said. It came out flatter than I intended. My older brother gave me the smile he saved for difficult clients. "You've been stretched thin, Ivy. The numbers show the composite line is underperforming. We need tighter leadership. I'm taking the wheel so you can step back and breathe." I looked at my father. "You signed off on this?" He cleared his throat the way he always did when he wanted the room to understand he was being reasonable. "Your brother and I have discussed it at length. The board will feel more confident with a single point of accountability. You've done good work, but the company is at a stage where we need decisive direction." Decisive direction. That was rich, coming from the man who still called me into his office to explain basic margin calculations I had taught him 5 years earlier. I kept my voice level. "The composite line is underperforming because the two of you delayed the equipment upgrade for 14 months while you chased that solar panel side deal that never closed. I have the email threads. I have the cost projections I sent both of you in March." My older brother's smile thinned. "We're not here to rehash old decisions. We're here to move forward. The paperwork is straightforward. You'll retain a minority advisory role and the same base salary for the next 12 months while we transition. After that we can revisit." I set my pen down carefully. The click of metal on glass sounded louder than it should have. An advisory role with no voting rights, no project authority, and a salary that ends in a year. That's not a transition. That's a polite eviction. My father leaned forward. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Your brother is trying to protect the company's future. We've already spoken with the key investors. They're supportive of the change." Of course they were. My older brother had always been better at the golf course conversations and the carefully timed flattery. I had been the one staying late in the shop testing tensile strength and rewriting supplier agreements until the language actually protected us. Blood ties, it turned out, made an excellent cover for deciding whose contributions counted and whose could be quietly erased. I asked the only question that still mattered. "When did you two decide this?" My older brother glanced at my father, then back at me. "We've been evaluating leadership structure for a while. The decision crystallized last month." "Last month?" Right around the time I had finished the prototype that cut production waste by almost 30% and handed them the data that made the next funding round possible. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs, the same sensation I used to get when a structural calculation refused to balance no matter how many times I checked the math. "I'd like to see the board resolution," I said. My father shook his head. "There isn't a formal resolution yet. This is an internal realignment. We wanted to handle it as family first." Family. The word tasted metallic. I closed my notebook, stood, and smoothed the front of my blazer because my hands needed something ordinary to do. "Then I'll need a few days to review everything and consult my own counsel before I sign anything." My older brother's expression flickered, annoyance, quickly masked. "There's really nothing to negotiate, Ivy. The transition plan is already circulating among the senior team. We were hoping you'd make this easy." I looked at him for a long moment, the same face I had grown up beside, the same voice that used to call me from college to ask how to fix a spreadsheet. Somewhere along the way that voice had learned how to deliver a quiet execution and call it concern. "I'll make it clear," I said. "I'm not signing today. Or tomorrow. You'll have my formal response by the end of the week." I walked out before either of them could answer. The elevator ride down felt longer than 4 floors should. Outside, the Burlington air carried the sharp edge of coming winter. I sat in my car for several minutes with the engine off, staring at the waterfront, replaying every casual remark my older brother had made over the past year about streamlining and focusing leadership. Each one now sounded like a rehearsal. That night I called the one person outside the family I trusted with anything related to the company. Jonah Price had started as a materials engineer the same month I did and had somehow remained both competent and decent. He answered on the second ring. "I need you to pull every version of the operating agreement and the last 3 years of cap table updates," I told him. Quietly. "And I need the meeting notes from the investor calls my brother has been taking without me." There was a pause. "You're not going to like what some of those notes say." "I already don't like what the official version says." "Send me everything." He did. By 2 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by printouts, reading confidential meeting notes that painted a very different picture of the previous 18 months. My older brother and my father had been telling select investors that the composite division, my division, was a distraction, that the company's future lay in partnerships I had never been invited to evaluate, and that family considerations would soon simplify the ownership structure. One note from a call 3 weeks earlier contained a single sentence that made the room tilt. "Reed and Theodore confirmed the daughter will step back voluntarily, no formal challenge expected." Voluntarily. I set the page down and laughed once, short and bitter. They had written the ending before they even invited me to the table. The next morning a message from my older brother appeared on my phone. It was friendly, almost breezy. He hoped I had slept on the conversation and realized this was best for everyone. He attached a draft transition letter already carrying my name in the signature block, ready for me to approve. I deleted it without answering. By noon the first quiet leak hit an industry newsletter that covered Northeast manufacturing. Someone had passed along a sanitized version of the leadership realignment, framing it as a natural evolution under my older brother's strengthened role. My name appeared only in a single clause noting that I would shift to an advisory capacity. The article was polite. It still felt like watching my own professional obituary written by people who shared my blood. I sat at my desk in the small office I kept on the edge of the industrial park, and stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I opened a new document and began writing the only response that still made sense. I was not going to make it easy. I was not going to disappear politely. And I was certainly not going to let blood ties keep masking the truth any longer. The morning after that industry newsletter appeared, I drove straight to Jonah's workshop on the edge of the industrial park instead of showing my face at the main office. He met me at the door with a thermos of coffee and a look that said he already knew the article had done exactly what my older brother intended. We spread the confidential meeting notes across his workbench, the same notes that had kept me awake the night before. Jonah pointed to a series of transfers I had somehow missed in the earlier versions. Over the previous 18 months, my older brother and my father had quietly moved development funds out of the recycled composite division and into a side partnership that existed mostly on paper. The amounts were not enormous on their own, but together they added up to the exact shortfall my older brother had blamed on my underperforming line. They starved your division so they could point at the numbers and call you the problem, Jonah said. Classic. I laughed once, the sound sharp in the cold workshop air. And then they congratulated themselves for noticing the problem they created. Efficient. By mid-afternoon, the newsletter piece had been picked up by 2 regional business sites. Someone had also forwarded a screenshot of an internal company chat in which my older brother told the senior team that the transition was already underway and that any questions should be directed to him alone. My name appeared only as a footnote. The erasure was no longer theoretical. It was operational. My phone buzzed with a message from my older brother. He hoped I had seen the coverage and understood that controlling the narrative early was best for everyone. He attached a revised transition letter, this one offering an extra 3 months of salary if I signed by Friday. The generosity was almost touching. I did not answer. Instead, I called Elise Monroe, the attorney I had kept on retainer for personal matters ever since the company first started growing faster than our original operating agreement could handle. She listened without interrupting while I walked her through the demand, the meeting notes, and the sudden public framing of my exit. When I finished, she was quiet for several seconds. They are treating you like a departing employee instead of a founding equity holder, she said. That is either arrogance or a calculated risk that you will not push back. Which do you think it is? Both, I told her. They have always preferred the version of me that stays quiet and useful. Elise scheduled a formal records request for the following morning and advised me to stay off company property until we had a clearer picture of the cap table. I agreed, then drove home to the small house I rented on the outskirts of Burlington, the one place that still felt like it belonged only to me. That evening my mother called. Her voice carried the careful brightness she used whenever she was about to deliver someone else's message. Your father and your brother are worried about you, she said. They think you might be taking this more personally than they intended. The company is still family, Ivy. No one wants a public fight. I stared at the dark window above my kitchen sink. They announced my removal in a trade newsletter before they finished telling me. That is already a public fight. They just expected me to lose it quietly. She sighed the soft, practiced sigh that had smoothed over every difficult conversation in our house for as long as I could remember. Your brother is under a lot of pressure with the investors. Your father believes this is the cleanest path forward. Can't you just trust that they have the company's best interests at heart? Trust. The word landed like a joke I was no longer willing to laugh at. I told her I needed time to think and ended the call before the familiar guilt could settle in. 2 days later the second leak hit. This one was not sanitized. A packet of internal financial summaries, including the fund transfers Jonah and I had found, appeared on a manufacturing watch site that specialized in New England industrial companies. The article did not name sources, but it laid out the timeline with uncomfortable clarity: resources drained from the composite division, performance metrics declining in perfect parallel, followed by a leadership realignment that removed the division's director. Readers in the comments section were less polite than the article itself. Several pointed out that the numbers looked less like underperformance and more like deliberate sabotage. My older brother's response was swift. He released a company statement framing the leaked documents as incomplete and taken out of context. He expressed disappointment that private family discussions had been weaponized. He never mentioned my name. He did not have to. Everyone who mattered already knew whose division had been starved. That same afternoon, Sky Mercer, the woman my older brother had been seeing for the better part of a year, posted a carefully worded note on her professional account about the importance of unified leadership during periods of growth. She did not tag the company. She did not need to. The implication traveled quickly through the same circles that read the trade sites. I sat in Elisa's office the next morning while she reviewed the newest documents. Colton Drake, the investigator she had recommended, joined by video. He was methodical and unimpressed by family drama. Within hours he confirmed that the original operating agreement still listed me as a 28% equity holder with specific veto rights over major structural changes. Those rights had never been formally amended. My older brother and my father had simply proceeded as if the paper no longer mattered. "They are counting on you not knowing the exact language," Colton said. "Or on you being too loyal to enforce it." I looked at the scanned pages on Elisa's screen. Blood ties had masked the truth for years, the truth that my contributions were treated as optional, that my equity was treated as decorative, and that my silence had been interpreted as consent. That night the crisis arrived in the form of a late call from Ren Hawley, one of the senior analysts who had worked under me on the composite prototypes. Her voice was tight. "They just locked the shared drives for the entire product development folder," she said. "Everything with your name on it is restricted." Reed sent an all-hands message saying the transition is effective immediately and that any further access requires his approval. "People are scared to even open old files." I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the dark ceiling of my living room. The private coercion had just become irreversible. They were not waiting for my signature anymore. They were simply rewriting the company without me. I picked up the phone and called Jonah again. "Start the contingency we talked about," I said. "Every prototype file, every supplier agreement, every independent test result that lives on my personal drives. Package it. And get me a clean line to Lyle Brennan. If the board is going to hear a story, they are going to hear the complete one." Jonah did not ask if I was sure. He had read the same notes I had. "Done," he said. "But you should know something else." A second set of meeting notes just surfaced in the same leak channel. "These are from a call your father took with two of the outside investors 3 weeks ago. He told them the family was aligned and that any resistance from you would be handled internally. He used the word temporary. He called your role temporary." The word hung in the air after he hung up. Temporary. After 8 years of 70-hour weeks and patents filed under the company name instead of mine. Temporary. I sat on the edge of my couch and felt the last of the old, hopeful version of myself finally crack. They had never seen me as a partner. They had seen me as a convenient resource that could be reallocated when the story needed a cleaner ending. The next morning I drove to Elisa's office with a single folder containing every piece of evidence Colton had assembled. Outside her building the Burlington sky was the color of wet concrete. I did not look up at it. I was finished looking for signs that the people who shared my blood might still choose differently. They had already chosen. Now it was my turn. The morning I walked into the temporary board conference room Lyle Brennan had arranged on the 3rd floor of a neutral downtown building, I carried only one slim folder and the knowledge that every polite fiction my family had built around me was about to end. Lyle had called the meeting after the second wave of leaked financial summaries made it impossible for the outside directors to keep pretending the leadership realignment was routine. My older brother arrived first, Sky Mercer at his side like a well-dressed accessory. My father followed, jaw set in the expression he used when he expected the room to rearrange itself around his version of events. Elise Monroe sat to my right. Colton Drake's report waited in every packet. Jonah and Ren Hawley had already submitted sworn statements confirming the drive lockdown and the fund transfers. I did not look at my older brother when I spoke. I looked at the independent directors. "You have the operating agreement," I said. "You have the cap table that still lists my 28%. You have the meeting notes in which my father told investors my role was temporary. And you have the bank records showing development money moved out of the composite division the moment the prototypes started succeeding. None of this is interpretation. It is documentation." My older brother leaned forward, voice smooth. "This is a family matter that got out of hand. The leaks were irresponsible. We were trying to protect the company from exactly this kind of public circus." I turned my head just enough to meet his eyes. You announced my removal in a trade newsletter before you finished the conversation with me. That was not protection. That was a press release with better lighting. My father cleared his throat. We believed a clean transition served everyone. You have always been emotional about the work. We were trying to spare you the harder decisions. Emotional. The word sat in the air like a bad joke. I had spent 8 years rewriting supplier contracts at midnight and still showing up the next morning with clean data. Emotional was what they called me only after I stopped absorbing their decisions in silence. Lyle Brennan spoke for the first time. The board has reviewed the materials. The equity position is clear. Any structural change of this magnitude required formal notice and a vote that never happened. The question in front of us is not whether the realignment was properly executed. It was not. The question is what remedy the company will offer. My older brother's face tightened. Sky placed a hand on his arm, the gesture small and performative. He shook it off. I kept my voice even. I am not asking to be restored to a title that was already hollow. I am enforcing the veto rights that still exist on paper. Effective today, the composite division and its intellectual property return to my direct control, or I exercise the buy-sell provisions and force a valuation neither of you will enjoy explaining to the investors you have been courting. The room went still. My father looked at my older brother the way he used to look at me when a calculation did not go his way, searching for someone else to absorb the consequence. My older brother stared at the table as if the polished wood might offer an exit. They had counted on loyalty. They had counted on the old pattern in which I absorbed the slight, smoothed the edges, and kept the machine running. Blood ties had been their favorite camouflage. That camouflage was finished. The board recessed for 40 minutes. When they returned, Lyle delivered the decision without ceremony. My equity and veto rights were affirmed. The composite division and all related patents were placed under my exclusive operational authority. My older brother's unilateral transition plan was voided. The company would issue a corrective statement acknowledging the procedural failures. My father and my older brother retained their seats, but the board appointed an independent observer for the next 12 months to prevent any further creative interpretations of the operating agreement. It was a partial victory and I knew it. I had protected what was mine on paper. I had not recovered the years spent watching them treat my work as optional. That night my mother called one final time. Her voice was thinner than before. Your father says the board humiliated him, she said. Your brother is talking about leaving the company entirely. Is this really the outcome you wanted? I stood at my kitchen window and watched the streetlight flicker. I wanted them to stop rewriting my contributions out of the story. They chose the method. I chose the boundary. She was quiet for a long moment. Family is supposed to be able to trust each other. Trust is earned, I said. They spent years proving they preferred control. I am done subsidizing the difference. She did not argue. The call ended without the usual soft landing. Something final settled into the silence that followed. The emotional safety net I had still half believed existed was gone. I felt the loss land cleanly, without the old urge to soften it for anyone else's comfort. 3 weeks later the last secret call surfaced. Colton Drake forwarded an audio file that had been sitting in a cloud backup my older brother apparently forgot to scrub. It was a conversation between my older brother and my father recorded the night before the original conference room demand. My father's voice was calm, almost casual. She will sign, he said. She always does when family is the reason. Keep the language gentle. We need her quiet more than we need her angry. My older brother answered, if she pushes, we lean on the performance numbers we already shaped. She will not want a public fight. She never does. I listened to the recording twice. Then I forwarded it to Elise and to Lyle Brennan and deleted it from my own devices. There was nothing left to prove. The truth had been sitting in their own words the entire time. I did not attend the next company holiday gathering. I did not answer the carefully worded emails that arrived once the corrective statement went public and the industry conversation shifted. Jonah stayed on as my technical lead. Ren Holly followed within a month. We leased a smaller facility across the river and rebuilt the composite line under a new entity that carried only my name on the founding documents. The first independent contracts arrived faster than I expected. The work felt different when no one was quietly draining the budget behind my back. Months later I saw my older brother at a regional manufacturing conference. He nodded. Once from across the room. I nodded back. There was no conversation. The absence felt cleaner than any reconciliation could have. I still carry the weight of what was lost. The version of family I had kept trying to earn a place inside is gone for good. Some nights the knowledge sits heavy. Most days it simply sits true. I built something that cannot be reallocated by people who share my last name. I enforced the boundary they never expected me to draw. The cost was real. So was the peace that followed. I do not regret the choice. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, drop a yes or no in the comments. I read them all.